They broadcast the warning on every open channel in the galaxy. I heard it through a crackled speaker in the mess hall of a patrol frigate barely big, enough to carry 12 people. I was 26 years old, pouring a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, and I remember exactly how my hand went still when the translation came through. The species designated human, originating from the third planet of star system Sol, presents a classified threat level of Omega-7. All Conclave member states are advised to support the proposed quarantine directive immediately. Contact with this species is not recommended. They are not what they appear. The voice was the Velthari legate. His name was Doroth. He spoke in that smooth, slow way the Velthari always did, like they had all the time in the universe and knew it. He was addressing the full galactic conclave on the day humanity had officially been registered as a new member species, our first day, our welcome ceremony, and he used it to call us a plague. I set my coffee down. Around the table, the other crew members had gone quiet. Corporal Owen Price, who never stopped talking about his garden back in Wales, had his mouth open. Navigator Claire Doyle was gripping her tablet so hard her knuckles had gone white. Our commanding officer, Captain Gerald Ford, stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, watching the screen, saying nothing at all. The broadcast continued. Legate Doroth laid out his case with the kind of calm confidence that comes from knowing no one in the room is going to argue with you. He cited population growth rates. He cited our history of territorial expansion. He cited what he called our biological compulsion toward conflict, and our statistically anomalous survival rate in hostile environments. He had files, charts, centuries of data collected from observation satellites we had never known were there, watching us from the edges of our own solar system. He had been watching us for a very long time. The conclave chamber held 312 species that day. Some of them were so ancient they had stopped counting years. Some of them were so large that their physical representatives had to attend via hologram because they simply could not fit inside the structure. And every single one of them sat there and listened to Doroth describe us like we were a natural disaster waiting to happen. There were two voices raised in support of the warning. The first was Elder Sorath of the Surathi, a species so gentle they had not engaged in any conflict of any kind in over 4,000 years. She did not call us dangerous the way Doroth did, with contempt behind the word. She called us dangerous the way a careful person describes a steep cliff, not with anger, with worry. We have found the remnants of their earlier presence in two separate star systems, she said quietly. Ruins. Both systems are silent now. We do not know what happened. We simply know the humans were there, and then they were gone, and the systems did not recover. I did not know what ruins she was talking about. I still do not know for certain. That part of the record has always been sealed. The second voice was from the Veil. They were the oldest species in the conclave by a margin so vast it was almost meaningless to say out loud. Their representative did not speak often. When they did, the chamber went completely still. The Veil Elder looked directly into the broadcast feed, directly at us it seemed, though that was impossible, and said only 7 words. The Surathi are right, the Velthari are foolish. Then they said nothing more. After both of them had spoken, the Velthari Emperor himself appeared on the broadcast. His name was Vareth III, and he was the kind of ruler who had ruled for so long that he had stopped being surprised by anything. He had seen species rise. He had seen them fade. He looked at the quarantine directive proposal and he smiled. It was a small smile, barely there. The kind of smile that means the person behind it has already decided and is only going through the motions of listening. We have reviewed the proposed directive, he said. We find it unnecessary. The species in question operates chemical propulsion systems on a single inhabited world. Their most advanced weapons are metal projectiles and low-yield explosive devices. Their largest military vessel displaces less than 4,000 tons. They have not yet achieved faster-than-light travel by any method. The Velthari Empire has managed species of comparable development for 6,000 years without incident. He paused. The only danger these creatures pose is to themselves. The vote failed. The quarantine directive did not pass. The conclave moved on. I remember the silence in that mess hall after the broadcast ended. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Owen looked at his coffee, then at me, and said very quietly, "Did he just call us primitives in front of 300 alien species?" "He did," I said. "Live broadcast. Every open channel in the galaxy." Owen nodded slowly. "Right," he said. "Good. Good to know where we stand. That was the thing about humans. Even then, even before everything that came after, we did not panic easily, we did not cry easily. We got quiet, and we got practical, and we started thinking about what to do next. I was a lieutenant then. I had been in the United Earth Navy for 4 years. I had trained for deep space patrol work, border monitoring, search and rescue operations in the outer asteroid field. None of my training had ever covered the possibility of the entire galactic conclave deciding we were either a joke or a threat, and either way not worth taking seriously. But sitting there in that cold mess hall with my cold coffee, watching the broadcast end and the screen go back to static, I felt something settle inside me. Not fear, not anger. Something steadier than both of those. The Emperor had laughed. That was a mistake. Not because we were going to punish him for it. Not because we were cruel, or reckless, or any of the things Dorothy had said about us. It was a mistake because when someone laughs at you and turns away, they stop watching you. And we had learned, over thousands of years of our own long and difficult history, that the moment someone stops watching is the moment everything changes. They had given us the most valuable thing an opponent can give. They had given us their back. Captain Ford turned off the screen. He looked at us, each of us in turn. Then he said, "Back to stations, we have a patrol to finish." That was it, no speech, no rallying cry. We went back to work. I finished my cold coffee standing at my station, looking out at the dark of space, thinking about a Vale elder who had said 7 words and then gone quiet. Thinking about ruins in 2-star systems that nobody would tell us about. Thinking about the way Elder Sorath had said the word dangerous, not with contempt, but with something that felt, even through translation, like a kind of sad respect. They knew what we were, the Velthari didn't, and I thought, standing there in the quiet hum of a small human ship in a very large universe, that this was going to matter enormously very soon. I was right. What happened in the 3 years after that broadcast is something I have been asked to recount many times, by journalists, by historians, by younger officers who were still in school when it all unfolded. Every time, they expect the story to begin with anger, or with some dramatic decision made in a grand room by important people. It didn't begin like that at all. It began the way most human things begin, with ordinary people doing quiet work, day after day, in places nobody was looking. Legate Dorothy did not return to the Velthari Empire after the conclave vote. He stayed. He established an observation post in lunar orbit, which was, in plain language, a surveillance station. He watched us. He sent reports home. He cataloged our military assets, our population centers, our communication networks, our trade routes. He was thorough and he was professional, and he did not bother hiding what he was doing because, as far as he was concerned, it didn't matter if we knew. What were we going to do about it? I was promoted to commander 2 years after the conclave broadcast. I was assigned to a desk in the Earth Defense Coordination Office, which was a polite name for the small group of officers who were responsible for figuring out what to do if the Velthari ever decided that observation was not enough. The work was not exciting. Mostly it was reading reports, cross-referencing data, writing assessments that climbed up the chain of command and came back with small notes attached in the margins. But it was there, in that unremarkable office with its unremarkable furniture and its one window that looked out over the gray of a northern European morning, that I started to understand what was actually happening. Earth was not waiting to be saved. Earth was working. The engineering teams in the outer asteroid belt had been classified since before I joined the Navy. I knew they existed. I did not know what they were building. My clearance level was not high enough, and the people who did have clearance did not discuss it. Not even in the language of hints and suggestions that people in intelligence work usually use when they know something they are not supposed to say out loud. What I did know was this. The supply runs to the asteroid belt had tripled in 18 months. The energy consumption at the outer installations had increased by a factor that the official reports described, blandly, as consistent with expanded research operations. 3 of our best materials scientists had quietly transferred out of their university positions and into classified postings with no forwarding addresses. And the black market in alien salvage technology, which had existed in the gray edges of galactic commerce for decades, had become very suddenly and very quietly very active, with human buyers making purchases that nobody in the conclave thought twice about. Because what were the primitives going to do with fragments of Velthari drive cores and pieces of Surathi hull plating? Probably put them in a museum. None of it went in a museum. I was sitting at my desk on a Tuesday morning, working through supply manifests that should not have been interesting at all, when Admiral Patricia Lane walked into my office without knocking. She was 63 years old. She had gray hair cut short and eyes the color of old stone, and she had the manner of someone who has made very large decisions so often that they no longer feel large to her. She closed the door behind her. She sat down across from me. She looked at me for a moment without speaking. "I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to think before you answer." I put down my pen. All right. If I gave you command of a fleet, she said, and told you that the mission was not to start a fight, but to make absolutely certain that the other side understood we could finish one, what would you do? I looked at her. I would make sure they saw us before they saw our weapons, I said. Fear of the unknown is more effective than any firepower. She studied me for a moment. Then she nodded once. Be at Hangar 7 at 0600 tomorrow. Bring nothing you can't carry. Tell no one where you're going. She stood up, straightened her jacket, and left. I sat there for a while after she was gone, looking at the supply manifests on my desk. The window was gray outside. Somewhere in the asteroid belt, people were building something in the dark. I had just been invited to see it. That night, I called my younger brother Alan. He was a school teacher. He taught mathematics to 11-year-olds and coached the local football team on weekends, and had never once expressed any interest in following me into the Navy. I didn't tell him anything about the meeting. I just talked to him for an hour about ordinary things, his students. A goal one of his boys had scored in a tournament, whether our parents' old house was going to need a new roof before winter. I wanted to remember what ordinary felt like. I had a feeling I was not going to encounter it for some time. I was at Hangar 7 at 0600, the transport shuttle that lifted me out of Earth's gravity and into the deep dark of the outer solar system took 11 hours. I spent those hours reading everything I had ever been able to find about Velthari military doctrine, about the structure of the Galactic Conclave, about the 7 words the Viel Elder had said and what they might have meant. The shuttle had small windows. I watched the stars for a long time. When we entered the asteroid belt, the pilot told me to look forward. I looked forward. I stopped breathing for a moment. There were 200 ships hanging in the dark between the rocks. Silent and still and enormous, their hulls dark against the stars, barely visible until the shuttle's lights swept across them and caught the clean lines of their construction. They were not copies of anything. They were not imitations. They were human ships, designed by human engineers, built with human hands, incorporating everything we had quietly learned and adapted and made our own. They were beautiful. They were terrifying. And they were ours. I pressed my hand against the cold glass of the window and I thought about the Emperor's small smile. I thought about the word primitives spoken in front of 300 species on an open broadcast. Then I thought about the Viel Elder and those 7 words. The Sarathi are right, are foolish. Yes, I thought, they are. I had no idea. Standing there with my hand against that cold glass, how soon the Velthari were going to find that out. The Velthari integration fleet arrived on a Friday. I know it was a Friday because I remember thinking, when the alert came through, that the timing was almost funny. Every officer on the coordination staff had been planning to take the weekend off. We had been rotating on compressed schedules for 4 months, and the Admiral had finally approved 2 days of leave for non-essential personnel. People had plans. Corporal Owen Price, who had transferred to my staff 6 months earlier, had a train ticket to go home to Wales and see his garden. He never used that ticket. The alert came at 0400. 40 Velthari warships had crossed the heliopause and were moving at standard approach, speed toward Earth, not sneaking, not hiding, moving in broad open formation with their transponders active, broadcasting on every diplomatic frequency, which meant they wanted to be seen and they wanted to be answered. I was in the coordination center within 8 minutes of the alert. The room was already full. Admiral Lane was at the head of the main table, standing, not sitting, which told me everything I needed to know about how she was reading the situation. Around her were the senior staff, the intelligence heads, the diplomatic liaisons, and one man I had not expected to see, Ambassador Victor Hall, the head of Earth's newly formed Office of Galactic Relations, a position that had existed for less than 18 months. Victor was 50 years old, tall, with the slightly tired looks of someone who had spent the last year and a half in rooms very much like this one. He caught my eye when I came in and gave me a small nod, not reassuring, just acknowledging. On the main screen, the Velthari fleet was a cluster of 40 green triangles moving steadily through the outer solar system. 40 ships, each of them, according to the analysis running in real time along the bottom of the screen, was larger than anything Earth had in active service. Our 6 patrol frigates were already on alert, positioned between the approaching fleet and the inner planets, which was, everyone in the room understood, a symbolic gesture more than a military one. 6 frigates against 40 warships was not a battle. It was a statement. It said, "We see you and we are not hiding." The Velthari legate Dorath contacted us from his observation station in lunar orbit, before the fleet had even reached the asteroid belt. His face appeared on the secondary screen, composed, unhurried, wearing the expression of a person delivering news they considered to be obvious. "Commander Voss," he said. He knew my name. That was mildly unsettling. The Velthari Empire, in accordance with Galactic Conclave Charter Provision 12C, regarding the structured development of emerging species, has dispatched a diplomatic integration team to formalize Earth's transition to affiliated status. The integration fleet will reach standard orbit within 46 hours. We ask that all Earth military assets be stood down and held in their current positions for the duration of the integration process. Legate Doroth, Velthari Imperial Mission out. The screen went blank. The room was very quiet. Ambassador Victor Hall cleared his throat. "Affiliated status," he said, in the mild tone of a man who has heard a great many polite words used to describe impolite things. "That's a new phrase." "It means what it sounds like," said the intelligence officer to my left, a woman named Grace Webb who had spent 12 years studying Velthari political language. "Affiliated means subordinate. It means they're here to absorb us." Admiral Lane hadn't moved. She was still standing at the head of the table, looking at the 40 green triangles on the screen. "How long until the fleet is in standard orbit?" 44 hours now," someone answered. "And our response window for the legate?" "He didn't set one," Grace said, which is itself a statement. He's not asking for a response. He's informing us. The Admiral nodded slowly. "Elara." She used my given name, which she almost never did in a room full of people. "You're being activated for the secondary mission. Effective immediately. 48 hours from now, more or less." Everyone in the room knew what the secondary mission was. Nobody said it out loud. "Understood," I said. I left the coordination center and went to find Owen Price. He was at his station, his weekend travel bag still sitting under his desk, untouched. He looked up when I came in. "Wales is cancelled," he said. "Wales is cancelled," I confirmed. He glanced at the bag. "My tomatoes are going to go over." "Owen." "Yes, Commander." "Get the team together. We leave in 6 hours." He stood up immediately. "Yes, Commander." I went to my quarters and packed what I could carry in 20 minutes. I thought about calling Alan again, but decided against it. There was nothing I could tell him, and I didn't want to say a goodbye that sounded like a goodbye. I left my quarters and did not look back at them. The Velthari fleet arrived in Earth orbit 43 hours later. Legate Doroth descended to the surface with a diplomatic party of 8, landing at the International Reception Facility outside Geneva. He was received with formal courtesy by Ambassador Hall and a small team of diplomatic staff. The ceremony was broadcast globally, which was, I later understood, deliberate. Earth's leadership wanted every human being watching. I was not there. I was already in transit. I watched the arrival broadcast on a small screen inside a transport shuttle heading out of Earth's gravity for the second time in recent months, this time faster and with less time to think. The shuttle's interior was crowded. 12 other officers were crammed in with me, all of them people I had worked with and trusted, all of them knowing exactly where we were going and what we were going to do when we got there. On the screen, Doroth stepped off his shuttle and onto Earth soil for the first time. He was tall by human standards, with the long-limbed build the Velthari all had, and the faintly iridescent skin that shifted color slightly depending on the angle of the light. He was wearing formal diplomatic robes, deep violet, which in Velthari culture meant he was representing the Emperor personally. He looked around at the reception facility, at the humans assembled there, at the cameras, and his expression was exactly what I expected it to be. Polite, patient, slightly amused. He shook Ambassador Hall's hand with 2 fingers, the Velthari formal gesture for greeting a lesser-ranked individual. Victor Hall shook his hand with a full grip and a steady eye and a smile that gave absolutely nothing away. I turned off the screen. Doroth had brought the integration treaty in a physical document container, which was, according to Grace Webb's briefing notes, an old Velthari tradition for negotiations they considered already concluded. Physical documents meant the Velthari considered the terms non-negotiable. The document itself was 17 pages. Its primary provisions, translated from formal Velthari diplomatic language, were: Earth would cease all independent military development. Earth would contribute 30% of its annual resource output to the Empire as a development tax. Earth would receive, in exchange, access to certain categories of Velthari technology. Earth would be assigned a Velthari governance advisor with veto power over all major political decisions. It was not a treaty, it was an ownership document. Ambassador Hall received it graciously, thanked Doroth for his time, and requested 72 hours to review the terms with Earth's full governing council. Doroth agreed to 72 hours because refusing would have looked impolite, and because he did not believe, not for one moment, that 72 hours would change anything. The math was too obvious. Earth had 6 frigates and a defense station. He had 40 warships in orbit. What was there to review? I know this because one of the diplomatic staff who was present told me later that Dorothy, leaving the reception facility, leaned toward one of his aides and said, in Velthari, not realizing that the aide's translator was still active, "Remind me to brief the Emperor. This will be resolved before the next rotation." He said it the same way someone says they'll remember to pick up bread on the way home. Meanwhile, I was in the asteroid belt. The trip out had taken less time than my first visit, because this time we were not being subtle about the destination. The shuttle flew direct, no course corrections, no holding patterns. We were expected. When we came through the final approach corridor and into the open space at the center of the belt's quietest quadrant, I saw them again. 200 ships. But this time they were not dark and still, they were lit. Every hull illuminated from within, running lights active, engine cores warm and cycling, crews already at their stations. 200 ships ready to move. I had been given command of this fleet 3 weeks before the Velthari arrived, in a handover ceremony so quiet it could barely be called a ceremony. Admiral Lane had given me a single piece of paper with the fleet's designation and my official orders. The orders were 8 words long. Be seen. Do not fire unless fired upon. The transport shuttle docked with the lead ship. Her name was the Resolute, which someone on the naming committee had clearly chosen with full awareness of what it meant and what it was going to mean. I stepped through the airlock and onto the bridge, and every officer present came to attention. I told them to stand easy. I sat in the command chair and felt the weight of it, not the physical weight, but the other kind, the kind that comes from knowing that everyone on 200 ships is looking to you. And beyond them, 8 billion people on a small blue planet are trusting that you know what you're doing. I had a plan. Whether it was a good plan was something only the next few hours would answer. The countdown to the end of the 72-hour window was running on a small display to my right. I watched the numbers and I thought about Dorothy's 17-page document. I thought about the Veil Elder and 7 words. I thought about my brother Alan's students, 11 years old, who had no idea any of this was happening. I thought about what it means to be human. Not the dramatic version of that thought, the one in speeches and history books. The real version. The version that is just people who get up every morning and go to work and come home tired and make dinner and fall asleep and do it again. The version that is Owen Price's tomatoes going over because he missed the weekend. The version that is Captain Ford turning off a broadcast and saying, "Back to stations because there is always more work to do." We were not heroes in those hours. We were not legends. We were people who had been told we weren't worth worrying about and who had spent 3 years very quietly proving otherwise. The countdown reached 12 hours. I went to sleep in my chair, something I had learned to do during my patrol years. Light sleep, not deep. The kind where a change in the engine hum brings you back immediately. The bridge crew watched the clock. Nobody talked very much. Nobody needed to. At hour 71 and 40 minutes, I was awake and standing. At hour 71 and 55 minutes, Admiral Lane's voice came through the comm from Earth, very clear, very steady. "Commander Voss. Admiral, the Council has reviewed the treaty terms." And a brief pause. Then Earth's response is no. I felt something ease in my chest. Not relief, exactly. Something cleaner. "Understood," I said. "We'll be on schedule." At hour 72, exactly. On a Friday that nobody on Earth was ever going to forget for the rest of their lives, I gave a single order to 200 ships. All ahead. Formation Delta. Let them see us. 200 engines came to life at the same moment. The sound of it, even through the insulated hull, was something you could feel in your bones. Every ship accelerated smoothly, in perfect formation, out of the cover of the asteroid belt and into open space, heading inward, toward Earth, toward the 40 Velthari warships hanging in orbit. On every Velthari frequency at the same moment, my communications officer broadcast a single message. "Velthari Integration Fleet. This is Commander Ilara Voss of the United Earth Navy. Earth has reviewed the proposed treaty terms and respectfully declines. We extend, in its place, an invitation to negotiate a treaty of equals. We are prepared to discuss terms at your convenience. We ask only that you look at your sensors before you respond." Silence on the channel for about 4 seconds. Then every Velthari sensor array we were monitoring lit up simultaneously. They were looking. I sat back in the command chair, watching our formation on the tactical display. 200 ships moving in perfect order, the blue marble of Earth growing slowly larger on the forward screen. Behind us, the asteroid belt, now empty, every hidden installation dark. On the communication channel, I heard Velthari voices, rapid and sharp, not translated, not meant for us, caught by our passive intercept arrays. I did not need to understand the words. The tone said everything. Legate Dorath, on the surface of Earth, had been handed an urgent message from his flagship. I heard later, from someone who was in the room, that he read it twice, that he sat down, that he looked at Ambassador Hall across the table for a long time without speaking. Ambassador Hall waited. He was very patient. Humans often are, when it matters. Finally, Dorath said very quietly, "Where did those ships come from?" Victor Hall, who had spent 18 months in rooms like this learning the Velthari language of power and how to speak it back, gave him a small smile and said, "We built them. Would you like some more time to review your response to our counterproposal?" The fleet held formation at a distance of 40,000 kilometers from the Velthari ships. No weapons were raised. No targeting arrays were activated on our side. We simply sat there, 200 ships in perfect delta formation, engines idling, running lights on, visible on every sensor band. For 67 minutes, the Velthari did nothing. I watched the clock. My crew watched me. On the bridge of the Resolute, nobody made a sound except for the quiet reports of system status and the occasional soft chime of a monitoring alert. I had officers I trusted at every station. Grace Webb, who had transferred from the intelligence division, was at my right monitoring Velthari communications. Owen Price, because I had insisted, was at navigation. He had brought a small photograph of his garden from the desk at his old station and taped it to the corner of his console. I noticed it when I walked past and I did not say anything about it. At minute 68, the Velthari flagship sent a request to open a formal communication channel. "Open it," I said. The face that appeared on my main screen was not Dorath. It was Admiral Kosa, the commander of the integration fleet. He was older than Dorath, broader in the shoulder, with the kind of eyes that had watched a great many things without flinching. He looked at me and said nothing for a moment. Just looked. I looked back. "Commander Voss," he said finally. "Admiral Kosa," I said. "You have 200 ships," he said. It was not a question. 202, I said. "We kept 2 in reserve." Old habit. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger. Not the contempt I had been expecting. Something more complicated than both of those things. He looked at me for another long moment, and I had the feeling, irrational as it sounds, that he was seeing not just me, but something behind me. Something stretching back a long way. "I am going to need to speak with the Emperor," he said. "Of course," I said. "We are not going anywhere." He closed the channel. Grace looked up from her station. "He's opened a priority line to the Velthari homeworld. How long is the signal delay?" "About 4 hours each way." I nodded. "Then we wait." Owen looked over from navigation. "Should I put the kettle on, Commander?" I almost laughed. It was the first time I had almost laughed in about 16 hours. "Not yet," I said. We waited. The Velthari fleet held its position. We held ours. 40,000 kilometers of empty space between us, and in that space, something was changing. I could feel it the way you can sometimes feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Not dramatic, but present, real. On Earth, Legate Dorath had stopped talking about the integration timeline. According to the updates coming through my comm, he and Ambassador Hall were having what Hall was describing, with characteristic understatement, as a more detailed conversation. In the galactic conclave, on the observation vessels that various species maintained in Earth's solar system for exactly these kinds of moments, there was a great deal of activity. We were monitoring 12 separate diplomatic frequencies. 11 of them were busy. The 12th, the Veil frequency, was completely silent, which was, Grace told me, unusual. The Veil were almost never silent. "What does it mean when they go quiet?" I asked her. She thought about it. "I think it means they're watching," she said, "and they already know how this ends." From the Surathi observation vessel, a small encrypted signal arrived addressed directly to me. I had it decoded. It contained no words, just a sound, a low tone that lasted about 3 seconds. I had never heard it before, but the communications officer who decoded it told me it was the closest thing the Surathi had to a held breath. They were watching too. 4 hours and 20 minutes after Admiral Kosa closed his channel to me, he opened it again. He looked the same as before, but there was something different in his posture. Some small adjustment that, if you didn't know how to read Velthari body language, you would miss entirely. Grace, at my right, noticed it too. She made a small note and slid it to me without looking up. The note said, "He's been given new orders. The old ones are gone." I read it and put it down. "Commander Voss," Kosa said, "Admiral, the Emperor has been informed of the situation. He requests a period of diplomatic communication before any further decisions are made." I kept my voice even. "Earth welcomes diplomatic communication. We would suggest beginning with the treaty terms, specifically, the parts about resource allocation and governance advisory powers." A pause. "Those terms were drafted under a different assessment of the situation." "I understand," I said. "We're happy to start fresh." Another pause, longer. How long have you been building these ships? I considered the question, then I decided to answer it honestly, because honesty, I have found, is far more unsettling to someone who expected deception. 3 years, I said, give or take. He absorbed that, while Dorothy was observing. While Dorothy was observing, I confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had a different quality to it, not softer. Exactly, more careful. The species description in our files, he said slowly, the one that describes you as persistent. Yes, it is accurate. Thank you, I said. He closed the channel again. Owen Price looked at me from his station. Was that almost a compliment, Commander? I think it was, I said. Make the tea. The next hours were a blur of diplomatic signals, counter-proposals, technical exchanges, and the careful, meticulous work of establishing new ground rules between parties who had come very close to something neither of them actually wanted. I stayed in the command chair. I slept for 90 minutes somewhere around hour 16. I ate a sandwich that someone brought me, and could not afterward remember what was in it. The Velthari integration fleet did not leave Earth's orbit, but it changed its configuration. It pulled back to a wider orbit, no longer between Earth and deep space, no longer in a position that anyone could read as blocking the exit. It was a small change. It was a significant one. At some point during those hours, without any announcement and without anyone pointing it out, the word integration stopped appearing in Velthari communications. The word they started using instead, cautiously at first and then more regularly, was engagement. Engagement. As in engagement between parties of standing. Grace noticed it first. She circled it on her monitoring feed and sent it to my station without comment. I looked at it for a while. That one word, quietly changed in the language of diplomacy, told me more than any formal statement could have. Words in Velthari culture were not casual. They were chosen precisely. When they changed a word, they were changing what they believed. They had believed we were not standing. Now they believed we were. The formal communication that came from the Velthari homeworld 4 days after our fleet emerged from the asteroid belt was addressed not to Earth's governing council, not to Ambassador Hall, not to any of the diplomatic channels that had existed before the integration. Fleet arrived. It was addressed to me. It was from the Emperor himself. I read it alone in my quarters on the Resolute, at 0300, unable to sleep. It was not long. In translation, it was 11 sentences. It did not contain an apology, because the Velthari do not apologize. It did not contain a concession, because framing things as concessions was not how they operated. What it contained was a question. 11 sentences, and the last one was a question. What does your species want? I read it 3 times. Then I sat at my desk and I started to write. I wrote for 4 hours. When I was done, the response was 3 pages long. It covered trade rights, military sovereignty, scientific exchange, diplomatic representation in the conclave, and 23 other specific items that Earth's governing council had, quietly, been preparing for months. It was not a wish list. It was not a demand. It was a carefully reasoned document from a species that had thought very hard about what a fair arrangement between equals would look like. I sent it before breakfast. The Velthari response took 6 days. When it came back, it was 12 pages, dense with counter-proposals and clarifications, and the kind of technical legal language that takes a team of specialists to parse. But the core of it, buried in the middle of page 4, was a single sentence that the translation team flagged and sent to me separately. The Empire acknowledges the United Earth Navy Fleet as a legitimate military force of a sovereign species. Grace Webb read it over my shoulder. She put her hand on my shoulder briefly, then removed it, because she was professional and we were on duty. I forwarded it to Admiral Lane with no comment. She replied in 3 seconds. Well done. That was it. 2 words. I saved them. 6 months later, I stood in the Galactic Conclave Chamber for the first time. Not as an observer, not as a representative of a Class 3 primitive world, as Earth's military ambassador, a position that had not existed before the day in the asteroid belt, a position that had been created specifically because the Conclave had no existing category for what Earth had become. The chamber was very large. The ceiling was so high it was practically a sky. 312 species were present, in person or by hologram, and I was aware of every one of them looking at me as I walked to the human delegation's newly assigned station. Not with the look from the broadcast 3 years ago. Something different. Something that, across all those different faces and forms and ways of seeing, I recognized universally. They were paying attention. The Veil Elder was present in the chamber. I had never been this close to one before. They were ancient in the way that very old trees are ancient, a quality that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with a kind of stillness that comes from having seen a great deal of time pass. The elder looked at me from across the chamber. I looked back. Then, slowly, with a gravity that made several nearby species turn their heads, the Vale elder dipped their head in a gesture that their cultural liaison had once described to me as the acknowledgement of an equal. I dipped mine in return. After the session, a young Sarathi aide found me in the corridor outside the chamber. She was small and careful in the way the Sarathi generally are, with large eyes that carried a perpetual expression of gentle concern. She handed me a folded document. From Elder Sorath, she said. She asked me to give this to you personally. I opened it. Inside was a single line, in both Sarathi script and human translation. We hoped you would find a way. We are glad you did. I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. I walked back through the corridor toward the human delegation's quarters, past the representatives of 100 different civilizations, past the weight of 1,000 years of galactic politics, and I thought about a mess hall on a small patrol frigate, and cold coffee, and a broadcast that was supposed to put us in our place. I thought about 3 years of quiet, patient work done in the dark between the stars. I thought about 8 words on a piece of paper from Admiral Lane. I thought about Owen Price's tomatoes, which he had finally gotten home to see, 3 weeks after the weekend he had missed, alive and overgrown and red and, by his own report, the best ones he had ever tasted. That night I sat alone in the small room assigned to the Earth delegation, and I picked up my recorder. I had been keeping this account for the historical archive. I had started it the day Admiral Lane gave me my orders, and I had been adding to it ever since, not every day, but whenever something happened that I thought mattered. I set the recorder on the desk, and I pressed the button, and I looked at the wall for a moment, thinking about what to say. There is a version of this story where humans are fearless, where we never doubted, never worried, never lay awake at 0300 wondering if the plan was good enough. That version is a good story. It's satisfying, but the real version is better, I think. The real version is that we were afraid sometimes and we worked anyway. That we were small, in the scheme of the galaxy, and we worked anyway. That an empire 10,000 years old looked at us and laughed, and we did not rage against that, or collapse under it. We just went back to our stations and kept working. The Velthari had been warned. They had been told clearly, by voices they respected, that we were not what we appeared. They had been warned that the danger of humans was not the obvious kind, not the loud kind, not the kind that announces itself. They ignored the warning, and in doing so they gave us the time we needed to become exactly what those warnings described. Now the whole galaxy knew. We were human. We were still here. And we were only just getting started. I pressed the button again and stopped the recording. Then I went to find Owen Price, because he had promised to make proper tea tonight with the small supply he had brought from home, and I had been awake for 22 hours. And somewhere between the conclave chamber and the Vale Elder's quiet nod, and Elder Sorath's one line on a folded piece of paper, I had remembered something important. Being human was not only about the fleet in the asteroid belt, or the moment 200 ships lit up the dark, or the 3 pages I had sent to an emperor. It was also about the tea. It was about going home to the garden when you finally got the chance. It was about a cold cup of coffee in a mess hall full of quiet people who had just been laughed at by the galaxy, and had simply, calmly, gone back to work. That is what we are. That is what we have always been. And I think finally the galaxy was beginning to understand it.